got a T-shirt with bloodstains all over it. Maybe laundry isn't your biggest problem right now.
I remember the day the candle shop burned down. Everybody just stood around and sang happy birthday.
And a security guard came over and said, "You're gonna have to move. You're blocking the fire exit." As though if there was a fire, I wasn't gonna run.
You make love to the right woman, Johnny, is beautiful, beautiful. I mean, the last time I made love to my wife, it was ridiculous. Nothing was happening. I looked at her, I said, "What's the matter? Can't you think of anyone either?"
I never learn, you know, like a waitress will bring my meal. "Hey, enjoy your meal, you too!" But you don't have one, do you? I'm a doofus. If you do eat, enjoy it when you eat it. If you have a break or something later, if you get an opportunity, that's all I'm trying to say. That's all that I'm driving at, really.
Hello, welcome to Comedy Think Tanked, a podcast with Leonard Kimball and Nick Gordon, two comedians who know how to take a drink and have a thought. Sit back, get comfortable, and enjoy. Now, whether they're ready or not, here's your hosts, Leonard and Nick.
Hello, welcome to Comedy Think Tanked podcast. It's Nick Gordon, along with my great friend Leonard Kimball.
Hey Nick, how are you?
I'm awesome.
Awesome.
Today was a good day.
Yeah, for sure.
Don't you think?
Yeah. We got to meet a true veteran legend of comedy, humor. I don't know. There's like a difference between comedy and humorist, or a comedian and humorist.
Yeah, we touched on it slightly, but
Yeah.
it's something you can Google.
Yeah,
and if
go
you want
Google that.
if you want an actual working definition of stand-up comedy versus humorist.
Yes.
This man he's a Maine humorist. He's a New England humorist. He's iconic, and it's Tim Sample, and
All right.
we had the pleasure of sitting and talking to him, and it was
Incredible. Like it was just mind-boggling. Like he started talking, and I didn't want to make any noise on the microphone because I don't want, like, no one wants to hear me right now. With the way he just started off, like, wow, okay,
Yeah.
that's how you do it.
That's how you do it. It's like he flipped a little switch,
Uh-huh.
and he went into performance mode. But yet at the same time, it was a conversation.
Right, it was a conversation, and he's just that fucking good.
Yeah, he's a pro. He's
Yeah.
a 40, 50-year veteran, and he's a pro. And it was a pleasure having a conversation about comedy with him and his roots, his upbringing in the art of. I mean, for lack of a better word, stand up.
Yeah.
That's he's been a musician as well, and he's done many other things. But
He's been in it for 50 years?
well, yeah, he started talking about how
As a kid.
as a kid and
So I guess
whatnot, but
longer
then he
than
got into
50.
band. Like, I don't know if we were recording at this moment or not, but he was talking about being in bands
Okay.
when he was a younger guy, and getting that performance bug there, and then kind of transitioning over into comedy because he was a performer, but then it was determined that he was funnier than he was talented, and then he was talented, funny, and
Right.
it just, that's how it worked out. And
Mm-hmm.
I definitely enjoyed him giving us insight into how that all transpired and transitioned. And for a kid growing up in Maine, parents who grew up in Maine, grandparents who grew up in Maine, great grandparents who grew up in Maine, like, that's very relatable to me. His voice, his stories, his viewpoints on this area, kind of interesting because I think it's unique to this area.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine. I mean, you're from Chicago. I don't know if there's like an Illinois or a Midwestern sort of humorist out there that is comparable.
I don't know. I would assume there is, but I just don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe when I go out there in October, I'll ask.
Yeah,
I'll ask around.
Ask around, because it's one of those things. Like, is there somebody your parents or your grandparents would listen to that would have been, comparable to that Maine humor? Because there's definitely people, Tim. You could almost say like Bob Marley, and then going back Tim, and then going back. We mentioned the name Joe Parham, and he mentioned the name Marshall Dodge, and like there's other people along the way throughout the 1900s that would have kind of led that timeline, that trajectory towards where we are today. Insofar as Maine humor, I pause to say, is he the best at it? From our perspective, it was, it's amazing to see that somebody who has had such a prolific career.
Yeah, to see someone who's like incredibly good at it, and like, and you and I have thought like, oh yeah, we're pretty good at this. Like, yeah, we've been doing it for a few years. Like, we're not the worst. I mean, but sometimes we're like, oh yeah, I think we're doing a good job, Leonard. And then we walk into that and we're like, oh my God, what? No, we should just stop.
We should stop now. This is ridiculous. We have zero talent whatsoever. We'll never be any good.
Just sell the microphones, sell the speakers, get rid of all the websites.
Yeah, it's hard. It hurts almost. No, it's good.
No, but I mean, it comes from, so many years of hard work, and yeah, there's something natural going on there, but it's like, it's decades of work, and we see it with how easily he stepped into the conversation with us, and I mean, not that he was performing per se, but like to hear about the things he's done, and how well he's done them, and for so many years being, so incredible in the area and in the country.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's something to be said for perseverance, and just, just plugging away at it, and never giving up, and never, not necessarily not taking no for an answer, but being in those moments where it's like, I have a chance to say yes to something.
Yeah.
And I guess, we've had conversations where things have come up, and I'll just say this: you're a little more reserved about it than I am. Like, we got a show coming up, and it may or may not be on TV at some point.
Right.
And my immediate reaction was yes. And you're like, well, let's look them up first. Let's just make sure they're not some neo-Nazi group.
It's not just some guy. It's not just some guy with an iPhone. He's like, yeah, I have a TV station.
Yeah. Let's. They have real cameras, and they have actual production crew, and
right.
But in my mind, like, you're in that moment. It's like, oh yes, let's just do it. Let's see what happens.
Right.
It could be horrible, but I think it's going to be good.
I think it's going to be good.
Yes. So that's a good thing.
I think at one point, Tim brought up that like it's not, we're not competing against each other.
Right.
Yeah. It's all just comedy. And it's not like, oh, I want more fame than that person. And like, we all want fame. We all want to entertain people. Yeah. We all want to showcase our abilities.
Absolutely. And there's an audience for everyone at some point, somewhere along the line.
Yeah.
So
even for a silly podcast I record in my basement.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with this, and maybe it'll get somewhere someday, but. Even if it doesn't, like, screw it, who cares?
Yeah, we're having fun, and we're showcasing our ability to drink beer on a Sunday afternoon.
I have vodka tonic.
Oh, okay, great. Sorry.
This is celebratory.
Celebratory, yes, it was good.
Tonic.
Yeah. So with that, let's send it off to our interview with Tim Sample.
Sounds great. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, 1 hen, 2 ducks, 3 squawk and geese, 4 limerick oysters, 5 corpulent porpoises, 6 pairs of Daniel Verso's nickel-plated tweezers, 7,000 Macedonians in full battle array, 8 brass monkeys from the ancient sacred crypts of Egypt, 9 sympathetic, apathetic, diabetic old men on roller skates with a marked propensity for procrastination and sloth, and 10 lyrical, spherical, diabolical denizens of the deep who all stall around the corner of the quivy of the quay at the very same time. Why just say testing 1, 2, 3? After 50 years in show business, can't you think of anything besides testing 1, 2, 3 to say?
Oh, I'm sorry, Tim. I'll turn on your microphone now.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
We're not worthy.
We're not ready. I got to refill my coffee.
No problem. Working perfectly.
Okay. Oh, Jesus.
I think we don't have any albums.
I think we're just gonna dive in case people don't know.
Okay, let's dive in. I'll fill
You
my
want to
coffee.
get your coffee? Yeah, go get your coffee. The coffee's all ready. There's the cream in the fridge.
Nick is going to stab me in the neck when we leave here now.
Yeah.
No. Go ahead and get your
that's
coffee.
okay.
We got plenty of.
You can get your
Good stuff.
coffee now, and then we are going to give you coffee later. The different kind of coffee. That's all. It's not the kind of coffee you're used to. That's all. It's in a small thing, and you put it in your eyeballs. Very funny, but your eyeball does not like it.
We were nervous that you might not be able to perform in such a setting.
Yeah. It's always been a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everything has to be just right.
So.
Yeah,
Just so. Yeah, the lighting and the
exactly.
weather, the humidity, and such.
The IV drugs.
Yeah. Leonard's
Okay.
back, and I just want to say to all our listeners, thanks for tuning in. That's in case you don't know, we're talking to Tim Sample today. Our guest has been described as Maine's humorist laureate, said to have been the man who wrote the book on Maine humor. He's performed all over the country, recorded several albums and videos, and his voice is synonymous with this great state of Maine. Thank you, Tim, for joining us on our little podcast.
Happy to be here.
Thank you very much.
It's amazing to talk to. We were talking before we started recording about your history, your 40, 50 years or so of performance.
The Tim Sample comedy album, ALBLUM, was released on my own label, Elephant's Graveyard Records, a mammoth undertaking, in 1979, produced by Noel Paul Stuckey from Peter, Paul, and Mary.
Yeah.
And so that was 42 years ago this year.
Does it feel like just yesterday?
You know, it's kind of strange, I got to say. Like the guy says, if I knew I was going to live this old, I'd be taking a lot better care of myself. But it's the perception of time as you get older, I think, is very strange, because on the one hand, it seems to be flying by, because a year, if you're 70, a year is a 1/70th of your life experience. When you're 6, it's 1/6. It seems like longer.
Yeah. Good point. Good point.
But I have these moments that are almost like flashbacks, where I feel like, wow, like it was 40 years ago this summer that Marshall Dodge and I toured as Sample and Dodge. I've got a framed the audience section of the newspaper with cartoons of us on there. We tore the place apart. We just went out. And it seems like, wasn't that just like last summer?
Yeah.
You know, that there are those moments when you feel like, holy catfish.
What have we done? Oh my goodness. I mean, what's your earliest memory of actually performing? Were you that kid?
I was that kid.
Yeah.
I test positive for comedianitis. I was that insecure kid with the appropriate level of learning disability, dysfunctional family, all that other stuff. So I was born in 1951. So in around 57, 58, I was a 6-7-year-old kid. And it was the era in the 50s of the cocktail party record. And it was Shelley Berman and later Alan Sherman and these the Jackie Mason and these some were like Borscht Belt shtick. Shelley Berman was gigantic. He was huge. And Tom Lehrer, the Tom Lehrer albums. And so what I had was I could memorize gigantic reams of stuff, and I loved to do that. I just was a sponge so I would memorize the whole album. Ray Stevens had an album called 1,837 Seconds of Humor, and I memorized the whole thing.
Jesus.
So what I would do, and later I memorized the Firesign Theater, and I memorized, all these things. So as a little kid, I could memorize these records that were far more sophisticated linguistically and conceptually than a 7-year-old kid's. I'd be 7 years old and I'd memorize a Tom Lehrer song that So long, Mom, I'm off to drop the bomb, so don't wait up for me. And when I roam, I'll come back to my home, although it may be a pile of debris. While we're attacking frontally, watch Brinkley and Hunterly describing contrapuntally the cities we have lost. No need for you to miss a minute of the agonizing Holocaust. So imagine a 7-year-old kid at a cocktail party doing that song for a bunch of middle-class white people.
Walking around with a hat.
Yeah. And so I did all that. But the thing was, and so I remember that. And like every full-time professional comedian, humorist, whatever you want to call it, some people do it, as a sideline, and many people do it. But for me, when I got that feedback, it was like I knew. I was a kid.
Yeah.
I said, this is magic.
Yep.
This is, and this is what I've taught seminars, and I've talked to people about humor and everything else. But that's, people can learn to do something.
Mm-hmm.
You can learn to fly a plane, or you can learn to play basketball. Some people, the moment they make the connection, it's like, this was what I was made to do. And that's what it was for me. So it was a funny combination of having the basic gift or skill or whatever you want to call it, and then having to hammer out the decades of fine tuning and how do you turn this into a career? How do you express yourself? That's been ongoing ever since. But it was a wonderful moment for me as a kid. The 50s were strange times, and it was the nuclear, war hanging over everybody's head, and Sputnik going over, and the John Birch Society and all the rest of it. So this was like a place I could be doing something, and I could feel comfortable.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. So, did you immediately drop out of school at 7? And
I dropped pretty close. I as I say, I had, and it's kind of interesting. I didn't used to talk about this, but I talk about it every once in a while now. So I was 10 years old, and I had a very serious head injury. I was a little kid playing on the playground after school, and we had these great big swings with the chains on them. And I guess I have amnesia over this actual event, but the chain broke, and I fell on my head.
Oh, wow.
And I was had a very bad closed head injury, and was in a coma. They induced a coma. I was in a Maine med for 2 or 3 weeks. They told my mother I might not survive. Blah 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 blah. And I came out of it with. Very rare to have total amnesia, but I had total amnesia of a chunk of several weeks. I had been sitting up talking to people, no idea.
Wow.
Nobody had the pause button was on. It wasn't record.
Yeah.
And it was really strange. So I came out of that. I now understand all these decades later. I came to the other side of that with something called nonverbal learning disorder, which the primary cause of it's a mild autism spectrum disorder. And it is most often, it happens to a lot of different people for different reasons, but the most common reason is a massive closed head injury when you're a kid.
Yeah.
So what happened, if you look at a CAT scan on my head, I have this about a 50-cent piece size chunk that's just blacked out, like a magic marker. What happened was, the brain is phenomenally plastic and resilient. So what happened was the brain rewired itself, but not to factory specs. So what happens with what NLD, typical NLD kids or people, adults, anybody with NLD, one of the things that we do, if you look it up and read about it, is that because the wiring was rewired in a non-traditional way, typically NLD people can make blazingly fast associations between seemingly disparate subjects. This is to this as that is to that. And that's a phenomenal skill in stand-up.
Sure.
Because
absolutely.
if you're saying, hey, have you ever seen this? Look at that. And people say, geez, that I see it, I can't forget it, but I never saw that way before. So there's that. And there's also this disability when it comes to very linear plotting. So I was the kid in the math class in high school that scored astronomically high on aptitude tests and did very poorly in class. One of the things I could do back then was I'd be daydreaming in class, I'd be bored, and one day the algebra teacher said, "Tim, what's the answer to that equation?" Just sort of to give me a raft of that. And I looked up and I said, 1.2 or something. It was the right answer. I just glanced at it.
Oh, wow.
And he said, "How'd you get the answer?" I don't know. And he thought I was being a smart ass. Well, actually, I wasn't. I just got it because because my brain's wired up differently. So, but I struggled with that really seriously. I dropped out of high school when I was 16 years old. I was thrown out of another high school. I left home. I traveled around. I had suicidal ideation as a teenager because I couldn't make it work. How can I be smart and fail? And of course, back in those days, if you tested high, did poorly, there's only one answer: you're lazy.
Yeah.
And of course, kids with learning disabilities, as I was, often are harder working than all the other kids in the class.
Sure.
It's just, but it's not. Something isn't right.
Yeah, it doesn't fit into the box that they want you to fit.
So
in.
this is you talk to high-level professional comics, you hear some version of this story.
Sure.
I swear to God, you just always do. You always do. So I had that thing, and I had a tremendous will to live and to succeed. And what happened was when I stepped out of the family and town culture where I came from, people said, "Well, you seem very smart. You seem like a nice guy. You seem talented." The feedback I got from the world was completely different. Like they were saying, "Get off of my cloud," and they were saying, "Oh, here's our cloud. You want to come over here?" And so that's where I always say, in the same way that Muhammad Ali is one of my great heroes, and that era, the boxing saved a lot of people's lives that came from the background he came from, and he came because it said, "I can do this. I can." There's a lot of the world is telling me you can't do this and you can't do that, and you're not going to be a doctor, you're not going to be a lawyer, you're too inept to be a fisherman. You can't. And I'd say, "But I can do this. It's my trick."
Yeah.
And so I would just rev up my mind and pop the clutch on my mouth in any setting I possibly could, and claw my way around. And I realized by the time I was 19 or 20, 21, I said, the die is cast. I'm going to do something. And I was an artist. I wrote books. I illustrated books. I did cartoons. I played in rock and roll bands until I figured that was an employment agency for these guys that just wanted to pick up girls, and that wasn't working. So, and then I started doing solo, and it was actually, I was 25 when I opened at what is now Merrill Auditorium for Noel Paul Stookey. And of course, you guys are probably too young, but Peter, Paul, and Mary was gigantic. They were like the Beatles.
We know the name.
The top of they had a bunch of #1 hits, and they were great, and I was a fan. And they broke up, and Stookey moved to Maine. And it was like really like opening for Paul McCartney or something for me. So I opened for Noel, and he and I hit it off. We became great pals. And I continued to open as a singer-songwriter, guitar player. And so I was 25 when I did that. For the next couple of years, I did that. We started an animation studio. I've got a picture back in my office of that. But we were on tour with David Mallet, me, Stookey, and I'm trying to think of his name, but he played a lot of guitar for John Lennon, played on a bunch of Lennon albums. He lives over in New Hampshire. Anyway, there were all these Caucasian male, young, acoustic guitar playing singer-songwriters, like 5 of us in a row. And we were on tour.
What a show.
And Stookey took me aside. We were playing at the Maine State Music Theater at Lakewood back when it was something. And Stookey took me aside and he said, "Look, Tim," he was producing a music album for me. And he took me aside and he said, "Look, this is the way this lineup is." And he said, "I like your music, fine. But I have to tell you, the gift that you have to make people like to walk out and do this thing, it's a much better use of your time in this context and this show. So would you consider just sort of emceeing the thing, doing 5-10 minutes, introducing the other one like that to mix up the thing?" That was a watershed moment in my career, because I remember thinking my feelings were hurt. And I thought, you don't like me as well as Mallet, or you don't like me like that.
Yeah.
But then I stopped and thought, I've seen the platinum albums, I've seen the #1 Billboard hits, I've seen the pictures of Peter, Paul, and Mary backstage with Ed Sullivan and the Beatles at the Royal Albert Hall. And I think maybe this guy knows something
he
about
might
the
have
entertainment business. So I did that.
Yep.
And that was the big shift. And he was right. And Peter, Paul, and Mary got together again in 78. They were touring in Australia. I was still living in his guest house in Blue Hill. And he came back from a tour, and he was up roaming around the recording studio. And I had recorded Reg Bennett, who was the engineer for New World Media back then, was from California, and he had a recording studio on a geodesic dome. It was 1979. And he said, why don't you just get I'll get some people in and you just do some shtick. And I said, whatever, just for yucks. We had like 50 people in the geodesic dome.
Oh, wow.
And we recorded it. I didn't think too much more about it. I went back to doing the animation. And Noel came up one morning. He said, I was in last night. I listened to this tape. And it's you doing stand-up. It's great. What are you going to do with it?
Oh.
And I said, I don't know.
Oh.
And he said, you ought to make a record. I said, how do I do that? He said, I'll show you. And he put $5,000 of his own money into producing my first comedy album.
Oh, that's
That you didn't even know you made.
And that I didn't know I had made. But here's the thing. This was just wonderful. And I have hundreds of stories like this. So Stookie and I said, here's this guy. He's worked with everybody. He knows that Dylan comes by, shit like that.
Yeah.
I mean, really,
Yeah.
I could tell stories. But so we're on reel-to-reel tape machines, editing with razor blades and tape.
Yeah.
And so Stookie tells me, he said, Tim, you say a lot on stage. You're kind of a placeholder.
Yeah.
I said, no, I don't. I say it once in a while. Okay, just saying. Like that. The next morning, I came in to edit, and there was a little reel, these mini reels we used to use for radio commercials. And it said, Tim, listen to this.
Yeah.
And he had gone through, and he had cut out all the ums and put them all together. And I put it like this, and I looped it on, and like this,
3 hours of ums and an hour-long recording.
Okay, you got me on that. Yeah, so that was how it really started.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And Marshall Dodge,
Mm-hmm.
and again, when I was listening to all these comedy albums, 1958 rolls around. I'm 7 years old, and this album arrives at my parents' house with the stereo, and it's Bert and I and other stories from down East Maine.
Yeah.
Because I grew up on the Maine coast, and I hear people talking like this, and suddenly, this is the thing I love is comedy albums, and suddenly it's people talking like how we talk around here,
Sure.
and I
Yeah.
memorized that one too. And come to find out, so Bobby, Brian, and Marshall Dodge did the first album, Bert and I and Other Stories from Down East Maine, in 58.
Yeah.
Next year, 59, they did more Bert and I. And that was pretty successful, too. The first one just took off like a rocket. But they got some pushback because neither one of these guys was originally from Maine.
Uh-oh.
And the Maine, people were like, well, wait a minute, what about this? So they were wonderful guys and deep appreciators of
sure.
Maine. And so what they made the third recording on the Bert and I label was called A Maine Pot Hellion. And they went and they found all these Maine storytellers and they recorded them. And one of them was my uncle Stevie Graham. Now, Stevie Graham, my mother's only brother, was a barber in Brooklyn, Maine,
Yeah.
who used to cut E.B. White's hair for
Oh, my
25
goodness.
years. And believe me, he wasn't much of a barber. I would say he was the barber, he was the head of the volunteer fire department, he was the town drunk, and he was a great storyteller. And E.B. White wrote 2 essays about my uncle in New Yorker. But the point was, someone I knew, my uncle,
Right.
had been on a record. And that was, I can't even see, because when you're a kid, I was always fascinated. I'd look around and I'd see, I was on TV when I was about 8 years old. They used to have these kiddie shows,
Yeah.
there was, I can't remember the guy's name now, but they have these after school kid shows and the Cub Scouts go sit there and they'd play country music and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Like a Captain Kangaroo.
Yeah,
sort
like
of-
that, that kind of thing. And I can't remember. I'll think of his name. Cliff Reynolds. Cliff Reynolds was the host of this one, and I was just a little kid. But we were in a TV studio. I see the cameras.
Yeah.
I see the monitors. This is me, just like with the record. I said, "This is where I want to spend my life in a TV studio," and like that. So that experience of having my Uncle Steve on a record,
Mm-hmm.
and it was really funny. Years later, I met Marshall Dodge in the 70s, and I had the Dubious Brothers was my band. I said when we played in Old Orchard Beach, they call us the Dubois Brothers. But they still give us the $50. I think it's $37.90 American. But anyway, I had the Dubious Brothers, and we did a lot of funny songs and stuff like that. And Marshall loved us, and he asked me to be on the board of directors of the first Maine festival, and that's how I met Marshall. And of course, I was in awe of Marshall, like everybody else. But I was too scared to say anything or do it. I just knew him, and I didn't even want to say I was interested in comedy or like that. But Stookie and I, me and Stookie were always writing scripts for movies that never got made, and meeting with all these interesting actors, bit actors and famous actors had gone over the top and all this other kind of stuff. And none of that ever happened. But we drove endless hours just talking about these movies that we never made. And so we were working on one of these movies, and Stookie and Marshall, this was 1980, Noel and Marshall were doing a show at the West End at Munjaway Hill for the Neighborhood Association. And Noel said, I was living in Palmyra. He said, I'll pick you up. We'll drive down. We'll talk about the movie. I got this gig to do with Marshall, and we'll drive home, and I'll drop you off. And I said, that sounds good. You can have dinner with me and Marshall. So Noel and I go to have dinner at the Hollow Reed. And Alan Caron, who ran for governor a while back, he was the head of the neighborhood. He was a community development guy. He was producing this, and I knew him. And so Stookie and Marshall is there. So Alan said, we got Tim Sample. We got Marshall Dodge. You guys ought to do something tonight together. And I looked at Marshall, and he looked at me and said, why not? And so I just went up to the show, and it was a big show. And Marshall and I had never done anything together, ever. What happened that night was just amazing, because what Marshall had an encyclopedic knowledge of the oral tradition and storytelling and American humor. And I had an absolutely inexhaustible ability to ad-lib anything about anything at any time. And he didn't. He was frustrated because he could just go on stage and do his riffs, letter-perfect riffs off his records. But he wasn't an ad-lib guy. I didn't even know what a set piece was. I just literally just cranked it up and spewed it out. And sometimes it was good and sometimes it wasn't. And we just brought the house down. We did for about 15 minutes. And we walked off stage. And Marshall was leaving on a round-the-world trip, and he gave me a phone number. He said, book us some gigs.
Oh, wow.
This was in the fall of 1980, and he was coming back in March or something like that. He said, just with his name.
Yeah.
So I booked us at the Chocolate Church. I booked us here, the Grand in Ellsworth. I don't know, wherever. I just called up and said, this is Tim Sample, Marshall Dodge. Oh, Marshall Dodge. We'll do that.
Yeah.
And
Saturday.
Like I said, there's a cover of a picture, a cartoon of us on the cover of the audience section, 1981. And we just went we played at the theater at Monmouth. We headlined. So I had a guy come up to me about 3 years ago after a show. I think I was at the Samoset or something, just doing something. And this guy's about 6'5", and he has a great big beard. And he said, Mr. Sample, I just want to tell you, you were the first live comedian my parents ever let me go see. I'm thinking, so I said, when was that? And he told me it was the Saturday night that Marshall Dodge and I headlined at the Common Ground Fair in September of 1981.
Wow.
And he was 6 years old.
Yeah.
And it was the biggest crowd. It was 3,000 people, easy. The biggest crowd I'd ever performed for. And we just knocked it out of the ballpark. We could do no wrong that summer. And of course, Marshall was killed. I think we did 2 more shows, and then he left for Hawaii. He died. He was hit by a drunk driver. He was riding his bicycle in Hawaii in January of 1982. Mm-hmm. But I learned endless amount of stuff in a practical. So Marshall was the consummate professional. This is why I'm able to be where I am today and do what I do. I had these wonderful mentors. Noah Paul Stookie, how many #1 hit records?
Right.
Charles Kuralt, Stephen King. I mean, you go on and on with these people that took me aside and set me down and said, this is the way to do it. And Marshall told me 2 things about comedy that completely changed my life. He said, whenever you're on stage doing comedy, he said, I want you to remember the old-fashioned 7-ounce Coca-Cola bottle. I said, what?
Huh?
He said, you remember those? They were green and they were shaped like this. They only had 7 ounces of coke. I said, yeah. He said, that was the most brilliant stroke of marketing genius in American marketing history. I said, what do you mean? He said, it had about 1 ounce less coke than you really wanted.
Really?
And he said, if you drank one, pretty soon you wanted to go get another one.
Right.
He said, if you can remember when you're on stage to leave the audience with just 1 ounce less than they really wanted,
Wow.
the next time you come to that town, and he said it's hard because they're pumped and they're saying, give us more, give us more, give us more. But if you can discipline yourself,
Yeah.
the next time you come to town, they'll all come see you again. If you give them that extra 5 ounces,
Yeah.
the next time you come to town, they'll say, yeah, he was good, but we've already seen
You've
it.
seen it all. Yeah.
That's this thing. It proved to be absolutely correct. And the other and the most brilliant thing over the years I've been told in magazine interviews and at different reviews of my stuff, it's people have said I have great comic timing on stage, that they've accentuated. Oh, you have great. And Marshall took me aside. He said, do you want to know the gold-plated secret to great comic timing? I said, I'd love to know
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
Sure.
He
Why
says,
not? I'm here.
it's easy conceptually, and it's, again, terribly difficult to execute. But this is the way it goes. There's one line. Never, ever, under any circumstances, interrupt them when they are laughing.
Ah, yes.
He said, that's what they came to do. If you walk out on stage, say one line, and they want to laugh for 45 minutes, what the hell business is it of yours? They are doing what they came to do. Leave them alone. And you know, because you do stand-up, you're up, you want to pump it, you want to crank it.
Yeah.
But if you have the discipline to let it be, what'll happen is you'll get this groove going, and they will tell you, because as you know, every audience is different from every other
for sure.
audience.
Yeah.
But this audience will tell you, this is how we like it. This is what we like. We're ready now for another line. And at the end of the night, they'll say, you had brilliant timing, because it wasn't your timing. It was their
It was
timing.
theirs.
Oh, yes.
That was hard for me to learn, to
Yeah.
let people laugh through a joke, because I'm so crazy nervous.
Yeah.
I want to get to my next joke, or I'm going to forget what's there. So how do you learn what bit to hold back from an audience? Like when you hold that, that
That's
extra
that
ounce
5%,
of,
yeah.
of coke.
Well,
Yeah.
what this is where I think we get into the area of what is craft and what is professionalism and what is really sort of metaphysics. It's what to say and what to leave out, like Bob Seger says. What to leave in, what to leave out. Is there is no logarithm. There is no template. But what you have to do, I have said for years, being on stage, doing a monologue is a highly vulnerable place to be. And it is far more transparent than you think it is. If you have prejudices and condescension about the audience, if you don't like what they're doing, everything you feel is somehow translated to them. So what you have to do in answer to your question, what do you hold back and what do you leave out? You read the crowd, and they will tell you that. But the other thing is, and this is, I've once sat down and figured out, if you add up all the shows I've done in my lifetime, it would be like one show a day for almost 5 years. It's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of shows. And something happens, like the analogy I use is you take a brilliant basketball player, like in my day was Michael Jordan, that could do these extraordinary things. He's not thinking about what he's doing. He's practiced a million times. He's played a bunch of games. But when he's actually in the game, it's like, okay, let me give you an example. So I was doing a show, I don't know, 20 years ago now, someplace in Massachusetts, and it was a big auditorium, maybe 800-900 people, and it was sold out. And it was right around the peak of when I was really selling a ton of records and doing a lot of touring. And this woman from the local paper had arranged to interview me, asked if she could interview me in the green room between sets. I do 45 minutes, take 20 minutes, and come back and do another 45 minutes or whatever I did. And she came back. She said, "Wow, wow, this is amazing stuff. This great stuff you're doing." But she said, "You did something that I've always heard is not professional for a comedian."
Oh,
I said, "What's that?" And she said, "Well, you laughed at your own joke." You told a joke. And I said, "I'm sorry, it's the first time I heard it." And it was. I was just like off, shingling 3 feet over the edge of the roof in the fog, and something happened. But to me, that sense, that gift or that innate sense, honed over many years of performances, tells you it's time to, like, I will always write out a set list. Last night, I wrote out a set list. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. Half the stuff on the set list I didn't do. I did some other stuff that wasn't on the set list because I was actually in the moment reading the audience. And that's actually how you can tell a neophyte or a not a pro public speaker from, I've spoken at more annual meetings of more corporations than I can possibly even enumerate, And these, a lot of times, this is like the president of American Express Corporation or the president of Unum Insurance or something. These are big time people that do a lot of public speaking, but this is what they do. They stay up in the hotel room for a couple of days. They hammer out their remarks. They edit them. They get everything just right like this, including the jokes and everything else.
Right.
And then they plod through what they've written with no sense of whether this is hitting anybody or connecting with anybody.
Right.
And you can't do that if you're, and you also can't, what I love, I find monologues and humor very humbling. Because just because they laughed at it last night, that doesn't don't belabor the point. You can't afford to say, "You idiots, you shouldn't have seen what they did. Last night I was at Boston, they loved it. What is wrong with you?" You have to understand that. And I say to people, I say, "Well, how do you know if something's funny?" Because I find it hard to write books and write scripts and write things in the abstract when I don't have, because people say, I want to be a comedian. I thought there's an easy way to find out. Because you don't have to wait for the reviews for a week.
Yeah, exactly.
It comes right in.
It's instantaneous.
But you learn that. You learn that sense. And also, part of, like when you say afraid you'll forget what's coming on like this, I remember I think I was doing my fourth. So I had recorded like 3 albums. And my third album, I did the Tim Sample comedy album. I did How to Talk Yankee with Bob Bryan after Marshall Dodge was killed. That was the album that Marshall and I probably would have done. It was my first album for Bert and I. Then I did Down East Stand Up, which had Saturday Night at Moody's Diner, and that was a gigantic hit. And then I was working on Back in Spite of Popular Demand or something. I was working on for the next album. And I suddenly, I realized I was in my early 30s and I was making these albums every year or two. Yeah. And I got freaked out thinking, where am I going to get my material? How am I going to keep this up? Where's it going to come from? I just got insecure. And then I kind of had a epiphany, or I sorted my way through it, and it dawned on me, I don't know where it comes from, but I'm just good at this.
Yeah.
And something will happen. And I stopped being so self-conscious, because one of the things that crushes careers, and you see it all the time, and any kind of public life, success, money. I went from making $10,000 a year to making $100,000 a year in 1 year.
Jeez.
Yeah. Okay. And things like that. Yeah. And that suddenly it was different. I was going places, and then, Bill Cohen would come up and say how much he liked my stuff, or somebody else, or Steve King, or they were all like fans of my stuff. Yeah. And I thought that was very disorienting.
Sure.
And if you take your, it sounds kind of corny, I guess, but the secret of long-term success, in my view, especially in this business, is don't take yourself so seriously. Literally, you're going to have good nights, you're going to have bad nights. And it's not it's not up to you to do everything perfectly. If you did that, you'd be the first person on the planet that ever did.
Sure.
Leave it alone. Let go of it. And this is where working in this dialect storytelling tradition that I work in, I gained a lot from these old characters that I grew up around. So I'm a little kid in the 50s on the coast of Maine. My dad had a shipyard. And there were these old characters who would work at the yards, and they would just hang around at the yards. And literally, so 1960, I was 9 years old. And there were guys that worked at my dad's yard who were in their 80s.
Oh, wow.
That were doing this stuff called spinning oakum, where they make this caulking material for wooden decks of boats and stuff. But they just hung around and did this because, with one arm as long as the other, because they had nothing else to do. But years later, I realized these guys were born in the 1880s, 1885, 1888. And they were old, wizened guys. They had great levity about they had a wonderful dry sense of humor, but they had something else. And I realize now how much of an anchor it was for me. Yeah. So this is the Cold War. This is Sputnik. This is jumping onto your desks, and we're all going to be wiped out. And, I can tell you funny stories about my family was going to have a bomb shelter, and all it was a walk-in freezer that was disused in my basement with a big lock on it. You'd probably die in about a day you suffocated there with some canned beans or something. It just wasn't a very good plan. It was all
better off outside in the nuclear fallout.
There was all this stuff going on in the zeitgeist, but these old characters. So I talked about this on stage, and I said, if I walked up, there were 3 or 4 of these guys sitting around, and I ran up to them as a little kid and said, there's a car on fire down on Townsend Avenue. You know what they'd say? Nothing. For about 3 minutes. And then one of them would slowly turn to the other one and say, now, wasn't there a car on fire back in 31 down there? Whatever happened to that car? And the message was, it's all going to be okay. It's all, there's war and death and destruction, and people come and people go, and you have successful years and you have bad years, and it's all rock and roll. And that wasn't a theory. That was lived experience that came off of them like in waves. And it made me feel better. It was somebody who wasn't freaked out and wasn't thinking, they just had this calm. And part of the calm was the humor. Yeah. And it was this, well, you could go this way, or you could go that way. And well, does it make any difference which way I go? Not to me, it don't. It's just that, take it easy. Yeah. Don't take yourself so seriously. Yeah. Somebody's been here before you. Somebody will be here after you.
Right,
and, when Bob Marley started getting very popular, and I had there used to be a whole Tim Sample section at LL Beans and all this stuff, and I had 180 stores selling my stuff, and I made plenty of money, and I had I was on national television and all this stuff. And then Bob Marley was doing good. I think Bob's great, and I like him, but he was like the new kid on the block. And people say, do you know Bob Marley? And I'd say, I used to be Bob Marley.
Have you met Bob? Are you friends with Bob?
Yeah. We did an interview for his podcast, and it's interesting because another part of the entertainment business that I had to learn the hardest way, everything I know I learned the hardest way possible is, you have to be tremendously ambitious to get where I got and do what I did and I made several $1 million. I sold tons and tons of books and records and did all kinds of television, all this other kind of jazz. But a lot of those early years, I kind of regret the fact that I thought everybody was competition. I thought everybody, I had to be number one and like that. I don't feel that way at all. I mean, that's a dumb idea. It's a really dumb idea. And in point of fact, I am a big fan of the Beatles, and I watched that Rick Rubin thing with the McCartney. And, they're talking about it, there's no two comics exactly alike. There's no two entertainers exactly alike. It's not everybody. Once in a while, it's head to head. It's, somebody's getting the part and you're not getting the part and all that. But it's much more people say, "Oh, it's you," or "It's Bob." That's like the Rolling Stones and the Beatles used to play up their supposed, feud, or like because it was good for business.
Right.
They sold a lot of records for both
the names
of them.
in the paper.
But now I understand that what goes around comes around, and I work with more and more people, and I guess what it is to do stand-up comedy. I believe you have to have a level of insecurity that is incomprehensible to a normal person.
Sure.
You have to have thousands of people say, "Tim, you're so great. Oh, you're fabulous. I just love you." It's like, how insecure can you get? But over the years, I've come to accept. I'm very fortunate. I've had good breaks. I've had some bad years. I've had some terrible things happen that didn't 86 my career. I mean, next month I'll be celebrating 25 years of continuous sobriety from drugs and alcohol. I don't talk about that a lot, but believe me, in this business, forget about it. I've seen a lot of people die.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen a lot of people's career, crash into the ground. Okay. But all through the years, I've somehow been able to learn. The great thing about stand-up is it's a microcosm of life. You just get up, you throw it up against the wall, you see if it sticks. And sometimes telling somebody about they say, "Do you ever bomb?" I said, anybody who's done this, as long as I have, they tell you they don't bomb. They are just off the wall. I have had some just terrible nights. And I remember one time, I was talking about this one time, and it was at a theater that I had sold out 2 or 3 times. And there were a lot of reasons looking back on it, what happened. It was booked at the very last minute. It had been dark and they were opening it up again. I don't know. There was all this stuff that I should have known better, but what the hell? Yeah. And it was hubris. It was like, I'm don't you know who I am? Yeah, I could sell the tickets out like that. So it was it's a small theater. It was like 250 people or something like that. You know how many people showed up?
10. 4
people.
You know how long I did a show?
You go an hour?
Hour and 15.
Jesus.
Oh. And they all laughed. I gave them free CDs, and I just chalked it up. And I said, lesson learned.
Yeah.
That wasn't a referendum. Am I any good or am I not any good? That's what happened that night. Another night, this turned out to be great. I was at the Mystic, Connecticut, when they had they had just opened the Seaquarium, the big Seaquarium there. And I was doing a fancy black tie dinner for the Heart Association or something big national thing, and fancy stuff for all the people that had donated over $1 gazillion to the thing. And so the way it worked out was I was doing my show from the podium. There's a big killer whale exhibit thing indoors with seating like this, with kind of like that IMAX seating where everybody's like right up here like this. Yeah. And I was standing kind of on the little platform that the trainer feeds the killer whale from and that. Yeah. So I start off and I welcome everybody and I start into my monologue, and suddenly there's this, like, it sounds like an explosion behind me, and the entire audience is drenched with water. And what happened was the keeper of the thing forgot to close the door where the killer whale is outside, and he comes in for the shows, and he saw this guy standing up there, and he's thinking, food? I want some food. And he jumps up and he smashes down, and the water goes. And it was right at the beginning of my show, and I was on for another hour and 20 minutes.
And you can't top that.
Oh, man.
Oh my goodness!
Only lost one leg, but I made it through the show.
Did you get wet?
I got soaking wet, but from behind.
Oh jeez!
But they wrote it up in the local newspaper. Gave me a rave review. Said, "This guy's a real pro. He's a trooper. Even a killer whale can't stop this guy."
Yeah, but that pales in comparison to what you'd seen leading up to that. I'm sure there's been plenty of other times where.
Oh yeah, there's plenty. I was doing a show. Oh, I mean, I could talk about this stuff all day. There's one time I was doing an outdoor show, and it was a festival or a fair. And those are very, talk about not being able to control the environment, Yep. So it was blisteringly hot. It was like 100 degrees. And there was bands and there was a bunch of people. And there were a lot of people there. But there was a copse of trees maybe 150 yards over here. There might have been 600 people at the event. They were all 150 yards away under the tops of trees.
Getting shade.
It's one thing if you're playing Proud Mary 3 times fast, but it's another thing if you're trying to capture. But another time I was the headliner at the Freiburg Fair, and I had done a show over in New Hampshire. I used to do, in those days, I would do 5 or 6 shows in a row, and this was the last show of, I'd been over in New Hampshire and Vermont doing these one-night shows, and I was the headliner. And at these big fairs at the fairgrounds, you're in a little box in the infield kind of thing, facing the grandstands. And then when the weather is nice, everybody brings their chairs and they spill out from the grandstand and they come out to the edge of your space. Well, it was torrential rain. And there were over 2,000 people there, like 2,500 people. But the rain was so heavy, it was, again, 100 yards. So I'm here.
Yeah.
There's 2,500 people sitting in the bleachers. I can't see them.
Oh, geez.
I can't hear them. I know they're there.
Yeah.
It's a lot like television. And I've got 2 hours to do.
No.
2 hours, basically. And you know what happened? It was so great. 4 or 5 teenage kids came out and stood at the edge of the stage area and watched the whole show in the rain. And I did the whole show for those 5 kids.
That's
and
great.
I could hear the audience once in a while laughing really hard.
Yeah.
Hear it float over to you.
Man.
That's nice.
No such thing as a bad show, huh?
Well, no, and it's that's why I say it's like an analogy for life. You have good days and bad days, and you have and you have to understand. I think for me, what I came to understand and why I love what I do, I had to stop thinking of. I had to get over the insecurity. I had to stop thinking every show and every gig and every book and every record and everything that I did and every ad I did and every whatever was a referendum on whether I'm okay and whether. And then that's again, people don't talk about it, but I know enough professionals to know. I mean, I remember Stephen King is a very good friend of mine. He's a wonderful guy. Just, you couldn't find a better template of how to handle, rich and famous. But I remember many, many years ago, he had done The Stand became I've lost track of how many adaptations of all his books and stuff. But this was back in the 90s. And Steve, I knew Steve he loves that book, and it was a pet project, and he doesn't always have his hands in it in a hands-on way, but he did with this one. Yeah. And we had talked about it and stuff, and I knew it was before streaming, it was broadcast, and it was going to be on CBS or something. Yeah. And I called him up, I don't know, half an hour before the show, 20 minutes before the show started, and I said, kind of good luck. And he said, "You're going to watch it, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, a lot of my so-called friends say they're going to watch it." He was just like really nervous about, And I thought, he's Steve King.
Yeah. What does he have to be nervous about?
Yeah. Exactly.
It'll be fine.
Yeah.
You can't just say, I'll catch it on Netflix.
Yeah.
You were on CBS Sunday Morning show, Postcards from Maine.
Oh, gosh.
I want to hear about that and
what
that was like.
Just wonderful. So it was 1993, and I had an office in Bath, Maine. And I have to preface this by saying I had always been a big fan of Charles Kuralt. Mm-hmm. I was doing a show, I remember vividly. I don't always remember all this stuff, but I was doing a show in Traverse City, Michigan on a Saturday night. And the only time, I don't watch a lot of television, but when I would watch television would be if I did a show on a Saturday night, woke up in a hotel room, got coffee or room service, I'd flick on the TV. Yeah. And I flicked on the TV. I remember it being in Traverse City, Michigan. And here comes Charles in his rumpled blazer. And he said, "Well, we have a new kind of show for you now. It's a show about America, and it's a this and it's a that. And we think we're going to have." He had this drawing table. I thought, Jesus, whatever this is, it's going to be great, And that was the first CBS Sunday Morning, and I watched it on and off. So fast forward to 1993, and the phone rings, And my assistant says, it's Charles Kuralt on the phone. I said, right, I'm sure. I have friends that can talk in funny voices, and somebody's pulling my leg. Well, it was Charles. And he wanted to know if he could interview me for a book he was writing, Charles Kuralt's America. And then naturally I said, gee, Chuck, I'm busy. Maybe another time. But I was really a big fan. And he met me in the parking lot in Bath. I was living in Bath at the time. We sat and talked for a couple of hours. He was just a wonderful, wonderful human being and a really talented TV guy. He was the network news anchor at CBS before Walter Cronkite. People don't even remember that. He was like 24 when he was the network news anchor. He was an amazing guy. So anyway, we talk. Yeah. He interviews me. But what he's really doing is interviewing me for CBS News Sunday Morning, because we step outside the door, took a couple of pictures. He reaches in his pocket, he lights up a Pall Mall and says, I don't suppose you'd consider coming to work for me at CBS News. And I said, I think I can work it into my busy schedule. I said, well, that's great. That's great. We'll have somebody. So I get a letter from Missy Rennie, was the head of Weekend News, and welcome to the CBS family. And then, so and I was talking to Steve a lot about this, because at the time Dave Barry had a show on, and Steve and Dave are good friends. And anyway, and I was like telling Steve, I can't believe it. He said, you'll get it. No problem like that. What he said was, you'll get it. And then once you work for them, you'll be calling me up bitching because they don't pay you on time, which turned out to be true, but that's another story. But so I get this letter, and they set up a couple of audition things, a couple of stories, and he said, we'll send a crew up, like that. Well, so I've been working in television for a while, and I hosted So You Think You Know Maine. I had my own weekly show. I had done, by that time, Good Morning America and the Today Show and some of these other things. So I knew about television, and most of the time, tech people, the sound man and the camera people, are not obsequious, but they're somewhat deferential. They go, Mr. Sample, we put this here like this and like this. So I show up at La Garage in Wiscasset to meet with my producer, Mary Lou Teal, and the crew. Well, the crew is these older guys, and one of them is positively obnoxious. He's Izzy Blackman is his name, and it's like we get out on the set the next day. We get out on location, and he's like, do this, don't do that, shut up, do this, move over here. What the hell's wrong with you? Charles would do it this way, all this kind of stuff. And it took me, and it turned out this guy was Isidore Blackman, who's in the Journalism Hall of Fame. He and Larry Gianeschi were the camera and sound guys that did 20 years of On the Road with Charles Kuralt. Wow. Izzy Blackman is in the Journalism Hall of Fame because I could tell you the whole story, but the punchline is he shot the footage of Jack Ruby shooting Lee Harvey Oswald.
No kidding.
And like that. Oh. So he's like this big deal guy. Yeah. And he had to put me through my paces. Sure. And then eventually I passed his audition. I passed the audition for CBS, and my first piece aired in October of '93. And I did 100 pieces over that, and with an average audience of like 2, 3, 4 million people all over the world. It was just an amazing gig, but it took me a while to win Izzy's confidence. But that working with Kuralt, and that was really like playing in the NBA, because it wasn't all humor. It was a lot, but it tapped into the kind of unfeigned affection and empathy that I have for the whole state of Maine. I felt deeply honored, and still do. And people still come. I was in a few years ago, we were in Missoula, Montana. I was turning in a rental car, and somebody said, are you the guy from Maine? That's what they say. Are you the guy from Maine? I said, well, there's a couple of guys up there, but they sent me out for a quart of milk. But that had that ability. And also, I learned everybody on the production crew, everything that went out over the air. There's 6 or 7 minute pieces. We'd shoot an average of between 50 and 20 hours of footage to get 6 or 7 minutes. Wow, it would cost $100,000 per piece to put them on the air by the time the smoke cleared. I was out one time. I had done a piece on black flies, and I was traveling. My wife's from Minnesota. I was out in Minnesota, and I got a call from my producer. And she said, we have to change a line before this airs on Sunday. Yeah. There's an audio line that needs to be cut, or a couple of lines. And I commandeered WCCO in Minneapolis, and it's the network, and it's just like they opened the doors. I went in. They booked the satellite time. I did we did the 2 lines. They bounced them. It cost $10,000 to bounce it off the satellite back down to West 57th Street.
Holy cow! Wow, really?
Then you feel like that's what I mean about the NBA. You feel like, okay,
all right, I can do whatever I want here. That's incredible. That's incredible. We don't want to take too much more of your time, but there's something that I have to ask. I've been listening to some of these old records.
Yeah.
I found them at a flea market.
There you go.
So Marshall Dodge and one of yours and Joe Parham.
Yeah, Joe Parham, wonderful guy.
Absolutely. I get to see him shortly before he passed.
Yeah,
up in West Paris, which was a treat. And I just have to wonder. I have to ask about Maine humor. And is it okay for someone like me who's a new stand-up comedian to do Maine humor stories and whatnot, or is that considered stealing, or is it okay to borrow those sort of things and do those on stage?
That's a really good question, and the best way to answer that from my perspective is there's original material that's written by the performer, and then there are stories that exist in the oral tradition. And it would be similar to in folk music. You have the House of the Rising Sun. You have 500 Miles. You have some stories and songs and things that are part of this body of work that nobody knows where they came from. And, you know who wrote This Land Is My Land. And so what you have to do is navigate. I have had to talk to people who take, like I created the story Saturday Night at Moody's Diner. I ad-libbed the whole thing. It's like 9 minutes long, live on stage that night. But it contains a few bits and pieces of, the punchline has been around for a few thousand years. There's this and that, but it's put together in a way that the observational stuff about how the creamer works and how the diner is, that's all original to me. So that's my story. I own that story, but I don't own the punchline, and I don't own. So it's a little bit like, if I were going to do the Noel Stookie song, I Dig Rock and Roll Music, that Peter, Paul, and Mary did, I would get permission for that. But if I were doing 500 Miles or, some of these ones that exist, that you just do your own version of that.
Right.
But what I feel is this: it's funny how people parse stuff out, and part of that is the business and how copyrights are written and stuff like that. I used a line in a television ad one time. John Gould was a very famous Maine writer, and had published, I think Houghton Mifflin, Little Brown published his stuff. And he was, fastest hound dog in the state of Maine and all these other kinds. But I used a line that I assumed was a line from the public domain, kind of just what people say.
Right.
Well, John Gould called me up, and he was ripped, and you can't say that. That's mine. I wrote, and I kissed his ring and genuflected and did all this stuff. And I said, I really didn't know.
Yeah.
But just out of curiosity, I found his editor at Little Brown, and I was curious because I thought that line, I've heard that line in other things. And I called the editor and I said, is this copy? And the guy laughed right off. He said, oh, John thinks because he uses this line that he owns the line. He owns the story.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I don't own, if I notice her turn, I'd let her go first. I don't own that line. That's been around forever. But I do own, if you start at here and you go down and you go down the hill and you go up here and this and that, if somebody tells the whole story the way I did it on the record, I'm going to say, wait a minute, that's not cool.
Yeah.
But famously, Arlo Guthrie with Alice's Restaurant, when he sold his catalog, the only big hit he ever had, well, he did City of New Orleans, but Alice's Restaurant made a pile of bucks, and he sold that. And then he couldn't do it in concert because without paying a royalty to somebody else. So he changed a few words around and rewrote this thing, and now he can do it. So, there's a little of that. Yeah. But I tell people, use common sense.
Sure.
If you're if you're just riffing, and you run into some of these lines, and you're really taking your own observational awareness of Maine and Maine culture, and you're using some of the dialects, some of the colloquialisms, some of the tropes and constructions that are part of the genre, that's fine.
Yeah.
But don't just, when you're doing it.
Oh, yeah.
And when you're just like taking a Marshall Dodge story and just doing it, whole cloth.
Right.
And I do that on stage because I've recorded 5 albums for the Burt and I Company, but I'll do it once in a while. I'll say, this is a story from the original Burt and I album, and I've worked with both Marshall and Bobby, and I'm just going to tell this story. And that's fine, too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Excellent. Great answer.
Awesome. So again, thank you very much. Really want to have respect for your time, but we like to end the interview with a bit we call curse the darkness. There's a saying that goes, I'd rather light a candle than curse the darkness. So it means like I'd rather do something about my problems and instead of just complaining about them. So in opposition of that, we'd like you to actually curse the darkness and complain about something you don't plan on doing anything about.
Oh boy. Yeah, okay. My big thing right now is flat out old-fashioned crushing ignorance. Just stupidity. We're not going to be, nanobots are going to go into your bloodstream if you get back. And because Bill Gates invented them and now he's getting a divorce, that you don't know if you're getting Bill's nanobots or his wife's nanobots or what's going to happen. That ignorance and stupidity. I grew up. This is a great art called kvetching. And when I grew up in a world where people were dying of polio, somebody comes out with a shot and everybody goes, hooray, let's get the polio shot.
Climbing over each other trying to get this shot.
Let's have the March of Dimes. Let's give a dime. And now it's like, I don't know, the nanobots or everything. But what's the percentage? I think 0.00001 percentage that I might get sick. I don't think I'm going to do it. I don't know. I'm thinking that just drives me insane. Okay, that is the darkness. And the fact that I can get my vaccinations and do the PSAs and wear the mask and do all this stuff, and some numbskull someplace doesn't get it. So now we have the Delta variant coming back, and I'm thinking, can we just put them on an island? Anyway, I don't get me started on that.
It's very good. So when I showed up here, I was slowing down. And I was like, I don't know where Tim's place is. And then there he was out front taking his trash out. And I was like, oh, thank goodness you were outside. So I know where you are. And he reached in and shook my hand. I was like, I hope he knows I'm vaccinated. Because I don't want to be like, am I the guy who gave Tim a sample of COVID?
Well, I'm all vaccinated and I feel like, but the other thing is that I was diagnosed in 2004 with leukemia. And with a kind of leukemia, chronic myelogenous leukemia, which my oncologist later told me that prior to the advent of this medication that I was on called Gleevec, it was not 90%, not 95%, but 100% fatal. He said everybody that walked into his waiting room with blood work like mine was dead in a year.
Okay.
So you're going to be looking long and hard to find somebody who is a bigger fan of medical science than somebody who survived. I took chemo for 13 years, this Gleevec, for 13 years, every single day, 400 milligrams of Gleevec. And guess how much a 30-day supply of Gleevec costs?
Can only imagine.
$12,000.
Jesus.
Okay.
Yeah.
$12,000 a month for 13 years. I like Obamacare too, but I am a huge believer in medical science, and it drives me insane when people, it was who was it that said Tip O'Neill said, you're entitled to your opinion, you're not entitled to your facts. Right. Facts are real things,
100%.
Anyway, thank you for coming. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. Tim Sample, everyone.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks for coming down.
Thank you to Tim Sample. I really appreciate his hospitality and generosity with sharing insights into his involvement in the history of Maine humor.
Yes, as a kid growing up in Maine, who had parents and grandparents who listened to him, it was a real treat to have a conversation with him about the comedy craft.
Yeah, it's been great. The last 2 episodes now, I had to deal with trying to figure out the etymology of the different Maine words.
No, I agree with you. It's been fun watching that process.
It's been okay. It's been fun for you to watch me try to figure out these words and try to figure out like the Latin origins of these words.
Right, and the funny thing is like some of them I'm like, oh yeah, I know that. And there's other ones it's like I don't know what that person said either.
Yeah.
But no, a real treat. So thanks to everyone who listened. Tell your friends and please share this episode along with the others. This is a good one. Follow us on Comedy Think Tank wherever you can. Be sure to give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Find us on Instagram at Comedy Think Tanked, Twitter at Comedy Tanked, and our website, comedythinktanked.com. And please feel free to email us any questions, any suggestions that you can come up with. You can tweet us as well. But the email is comedythinktank@gmail.com. Thanks again, everyone. Good day.
Theme music was written and produced by a minor, Ralph Birgfeld. No comedians were hurt in the production of this podcast. All audio snippets of actual funny punchlines were not written or performed by any of us or our subsidiaries. Rather, they are express written bits of professionals we admire. Let the civil actions be filed. Any opinion heard, actual or implied, is that of the Comedy Think Tank producers and their guests. Any slight, insult, affront, slur, disparaging remark, snub, rebuff, rejection, or spurning, no matter how derogatory, pejorative, or abusive you may feel it is, was not intended, but for comedic, entertaining purposes only. Thanks for listening.
Holy shit.
When he started talking, I was like, I don't want to say anything. I don't even want to laugh. I don't want to make any noise on the microphone because whatever's happening right now, I just want to stare at it.
Fucking amazing. That's one of the troubles, right? Is you watch that and you're going like, I'm fucking shit.
Right. For all the times we've been to shitty shows and we were like, yeah, Nick, I think we're pretty good. Yeah, Leonard, we're good.
We're good.
And then
you watch that and you're like,
I got
nothing.
I don't even know why are we here? What?
I quit.
Fucking sell these microphones.
Yep. Sell everything. Sell it all. I'm gonna go just work my regular job. I'm gonna be happy that I had a chance. I had 15 minutes of fame.
Yeah, I'm gonna get myself a new tie. I'll be at work.
I'm good. I'll be at work, and I'm gonna work really hard and try to earn, $85,000 a year someday, and call it good. I'm good.
And
I'm
we're
fine.
good. Yeah.
Yeah. Nope. It's all right.
All done.
I get it. No.